Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kari. Since back to school season is upon us, and some people have actually already gone back to school, I thought it would be fun to talk about books that are set in academic settings today. And even if you aren't a student anymore, I think reading about academic settings really puts you in the fall state of mind, which I am so ready to be in the fall state of mind. I'm so ready for autumn. So I think everyone will be able to find something on this list that they're interested in. So first I'm going to talk about one of my favorite books that I read last year, and that's Madam by Phoebe Wynne. So this takes place at an elite girls boarding school in the Scottish Cliffs, and it follows Rose, who's the new classics teacher. And Rose is the first new teacher in a decade, so she really feels on the outs with all the other teachers, and even the students treat her like an outsider. As the school year progresses, she starts to learn some unsettling details about this school and about the students and the other teachers, and she starts to learn more and more about the teacher that she replaced. The more she learns, the more unsettled she is and worried that she made the wrong choice to work at this school. If you're a dark academia fan, I would definitely recommend this book. It was one of my favorites last year. Also, I just have to add, this is one of my favorite book covers of all time. I think it's absolutely stunning. Next we have All's Well by Mona Awad. So All's Well follows Miranda, who's a college theater director. Miranda was an aspiring actress, but then she had a really bad accident and that completely destroyed her dreams. So now she lives in chronic pain, and she's even starting to be a bit too dependent on her painkillers. So at the college with her students, she's trying to put on the play All's Well That Ends Well by Shakespeare. But there's going to be kind of like a mutiny among her students, and they're going to want to take over and put on Hamlet instead. I actually haven't read this one yet, but I'm really looking forward to it because I loved Mona Awad's Bunny. So if this is anything like Bunny, I'm gonna absolutely love it. And especially because it's also in an academic setting, just like Bunny, I think this could be one of my favorite books. Again, let's talk about this cover. I think this is my favorite cover of all time. Next is You Deserve Nothing by Alexander Maksik. You Deserve Nothing takes place in a Paris international high school, and we follow 3 point of views. One point of view is from Will. He's a teacher at this international school, and all the teachers love him. Everybody wants to be in his class. A second point of view is Gilad, who's a male student in Will's senior literature class. Gilad really looks up to Will and is inspired by Will to be a better person in life, and really wants to show Will how much he's learned in his classroom and how much Will has inspired him to be a better person. And the third point of view is where things get tricky, shall we say, because the third point of view is from Marie, a female student at this international school. And we find out pretty early on that Marie and Will, the teacher, are having an affair. So like I said, all the students at this school really look up to Will. So this is a super interesting character study about how someone can come off so perfect and inspiring and is really changing the world through his classes. But on the other hand, he's truly a horrible person for what he's doing with Marie. So this is an interesting character study of people aren't always what they seem. This is a truly excellent book. I gave this 5 stars. It was so good. Next is the book that I already referenced in this video, and that's Bunny by Mona Awad. So Bunny follows Samantha, who's a university student in an MFA writing program. Now in this writing program, there's a group of other girls who are super cliquey. They're like the mean girls of the university. And they're all really cliche, like preppy girls. They're so sweet to each other, like it's like saccharine the way that they talk to each other, and they call each other Bunny. Now Samantha hates the bunnies. She makes fun of them all the time to her best friend Ava. But then one day the bunnies decide to invite Samantha to come over and hang out with them. So you would think that Samantha wouldn't want to go, right? Because she talks shit about these girls all the time. But in the end, she goes, to the bewilderment of her best friend Ava, because she's like, don't you hate these girls? Why would you go hang out with them? But in the end, Samantha goes, and that kind of starts this friendship between Samantha and the bunnies. And when Samantha starts to learn more and more about the bunnies, things get weirder and weirder. And when I say weird, I mean weird. I read this book earlier this year, and it shot to my top 5 favorite books of all time. It's incredible. Next we have My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So these 2 books are actually quite similar. If you've read You Deserve Nothing and enjoyed it, I would recommend My Dark Vanessa. And same thing, if you've read My Dark Vanessa and enjoyed it, I would recommend You Deserve Nothing. The themes are very similar in these 2 books. So My Dark Vanessa follows Vanessa in 2 timelines. One is in the year 2000 when she's a student in high school, and one is in 2017. So in the 2000 timeline, Vanessa is 15 years old, and she gets into what she would call a relationship with her English teacher, Jacob Strain. Obviously, it's not really a relationship. You can't have a relationship between an adult and a 15-year-old, but in Vanessa's mind, she thinks that what they have is a real relationship. Then in the 2017 timeline, which is the today timeline, we have Vanessa, who's been contacted by Strain. We understand that they aren't together anymore, but Strain has been accused of having relationships with more of his students in this timeline. And he contacts Vanessa to be like a character witness for him because he believes that she would say good things about him. So in the 2017 timeline, we see Vanessa struggling. Does she want to help defend this man? Because whether she wants to admit it or not, he has really affected her life in deeply profound ways. I will say that this is a really hard book to read. It gets kind of graphic at times, but it's such a powerfully emotional book. It made me cry multiple times, and it's an incredible character study of Vanessa and how these things that happened to her when she was 15 years old are affecting her as an adult. Next is a bit obvious, but I couldn't not mention one of my favorite books ever, and that's The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I assume you already know what The Secret History is about, but I have to pitch pitch it to you just in case because, like I said, this is one of my favorite books of all time. So The Secret History follows this really small group of students at an elite university who all study classics. And we follow these students through the eyes of the protagonist, Richard Papin. So Richard is able to integrate this really tight-knit group of students who only take classes with this one professor, Julian Morrow. And Julian is really eccentric and really passionate about what he teaches. So from the first page of this book, we find out that one of these students in this tight-knit group has been murdered by the others, but we have no idea what the motives are. So basically this book almost starts at the end of the story and then rewinds to the beginning of the school year, and then we work forwards to this murder happening at the end of the school year. And through the school year, we learn more and more about this cast of characters. Donna Tartt's writing in this is impeccable. This is actually kind of a long book, but when I got to the end of it, I just wanted more. I wanted 600 more pages of this. I could have kept reading this literally forever. Her writing is so beautiful and atmospheric. So this is the grandfather of dark academia. If you like dark academia vibes, you absolutely have to read The Secret History. Next, we have a nonfiction book, and that's Educated by Tara Westover. So Tara Westover grew up in the middle of nowhere in Idaho with her survivalist parents. Her parents did not trust the government, and they believed that the end of time was coming any day now. So Tara and her siblings never went to school because her parents didn't trust it. But as Tara started to grow up, she became more and more interested in getting an education, but she knew that her parents would not allow it. So she became so desperate that she would hide in their basement and read books. So since she wasn't going to school all day, her and her siblings would go work at their dad's junkyard. So this was actually a really dangerous situation for Tara, and as she grew up, her brothers became more and more violent with her. So this is a really harrowing story about how Tara became so hungry for an education that she paved that path for herself. Because in the blurb it tells you that she ends up going to Harvard and to Cambridge. So it's fascinating to see where she started from, these horrible living conditions, and seeing how she gets this prestigious education. This is one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. I would really recommend it. So next we have a thriller that's been translated from Japanese, and it's Confessions by Kanae Minato. So this book has, I think it was 6 different chapters, and each chapter is from a different point of view. But our opening point of view is from Moriguchi, who's a teacher at a middle school. So we find out that Moriguchi is resigning from her position as a teacher. But before she goes, she's going to give this lecture to her students, telling them that she knows 2 of the students in this classroom have done something horrible. And because of this horrible thing that these 2 students have done, Moriguchi is determined to get revenge on them. So personally, I enjoyed this book, but it's not one of my favorite thrillers I've ever read. But I do know that it's super popular and people really enjoyed this one, so I wanted to mention it anyway. Next we have For Your Own Good by Samantha Downing. So in this one we follow Teddy, who's a high school teacher at a prestigious high school. Teddy has actually just won Teacher of the Year, so he's a really respected teacher. But when we're reading from Teddy's perspective, we understand that he kind of has an axe to grind with these students of his. He's kind of bitter about the fact that these students are so privileged and he never had this opportunity when he was a student. And he thinks he's going to take it into his own hands to teach them this big life lesson. But we start to find out that Teddy has some secrets that he's hiding. And nothing is really as it seems with Teddy and some of his students and even their parents. This is a really character-focused thriller, so if you like focusing on characters, I would really recommend it because the character development is really, really good. Next we have They Never Learn by Layne Fargo. So in They Never Learn, we follow 2 perspectives. One is Scarlett, who's a professor at the university, and the other is Carly, who's a student at the university. So Carly is a freshman, and one day her roommate gets sexually assaulted. And then Carly becomes obsessed with making her attacker pay. Then on the other hand, we have this professor, Scarlett, and every year she chooses to murder a man who has sexually assaulted someone. So we go back and forth between these 2 perspectives, learning about how these women are getting revenge on these horrible men. Again, similarly to Confessions, I just thought this one was okay, but I do know that this is a well-loved, good for her thriller in the community. So if you're interested, I still would recommend picking it up because it could be for you. Next we have The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. So The Maidens takes place at Cambridge University, and it follows Mariana, who's the aunt of Zoe, a student at Cambridge. And we find out that one of Zoe's best friends has been murdered. So Mariana, who used to be a student at Cambridge, becomes obsessed with figuring out who committed this murder. So Mariana ends up going and staying at Cambridge so that she can figure out who did this. While she's there, she meets one of Zoe's professors, Edward Fosca. So Fosca is the Greek tragedy teacher that everybody's obsessed with. And he even has this little fan group almost of female students, and they call themselves the Maidens. So the more that Mariana learns about Professor Fosca, she becomes certain that he's the one that killed Zoe's friend. So this is actually a really divisive book. Some people really love this book and some people really hate this book. Personally, I was right in the middle because I guessed what the ending was, and I don't like that in a thriller. I don't like when I can guess it. But other people said they were really surprised and loved the ending. So if it sounds interesting to you, maybe check it out and see where you fall. So next I wanted to share a classic that takes place in an academic setting, and that's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. So this is a coming of age story of Jane. And at the beginning of the story, we follow Jane as a young girl. She's orphaned and has to go live with her aunt and cousins who are just cruel to her. And basically one day her aunt sends her off to boarding school, not because she wants to give her an education, but kind of to get rid of her. And Jane wants to get an education anyway. So we follow Jane when she goes to Lowood Institute. Now while Jane is really happy to get away from her cruel aunt and cousins, Lowood really isn't that much better. The living conditions are horrible and the headmaster is an asshole. asshole. But the one saving grace is that Jane makes really good friends with this other student, Helen. Also, she has this really great teacher named Miss Temple. If you've seen Matilda, think Miss Honey. She's like that. So we follow Jane for a bit during her time at Lowood Institute, and then we find out that she becomes a teacher at Lowood. And after being a teacher at Lowood for a bit of time, she becomes a governess. So while she's a governess, technically that's not a traditional academic setting because she's in someone's house, but she's still instructing this little girl named Adele. Even though Jane Eyre is quite long, it's really accessible for a Victorian story. It's one of my favorite classics of all time. I would really recommend it. Next we have Disorientation by Elaine Chou. So this follows Ingrid, who's a PhD candidate, and she's writing her dissertation on a famous Chinese poet. She's really fed up with working on this dissertation, but she's really working hard to finish it. One day while she's doing her research, she stumbles upon this note in the archives of this poet. And whatever this note is, she sees it as a ticket out of academia. But what she doesn't know is that this note is going to completely upend her life, because her and her best friend are going to go on all of these misadventures together because of this note. So I actually haven't read this one yet, but I'm really looking forward to it because it's supposed to be really satirical and a really interesting look on what it's like to be Taiwanese American. Also, this cover is super cute. Next is Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. So this follows our female protagonist who is a professor at a university, and her husband is also a professor at the same university, but he's in the middle of a scandal right now because he's being accused of having inappropriate relationships with some of his students. So her world is kind of being turned upside down, but things start to get even worse when she starts to fall for this male novelist. I actually haven't read this one yet, but I'm really looking forward to it because I've heard pretty good things about it. However, I really don't like this cover. This is the American cover. I wish I would have gotten the UK cover. It's way better. Next is The Divines by Ellie Eaton. So this takes place in two timelines. One is today in Los Angeles, and the other is in the 90s at a British boarding school. So in the 90s, we're at this British boarding school called St. John the Divine, and our main character, Josephine, was a student there and was one of the preppy girls who did all the cliche teenage girl things. But we know that something happened at this school that completely destroyed it and made the school close. And in the today timeline, Josephine goes back to the school and she has all these overwhelming feelings come back to her, all these emotions that are tied to these memories that she had at this school. But the more time she spends there, the more memories that come back about the scandal that destroyed the school. This is another one that I haven't read yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. Next we have Tampa by Alissa Nutting. So I haven't read this one yet, but I know that this is a super divisive book because of the contents of the story. So Tampa follows a middle school teacher, Celeste, who's 26 years old. And the blurb says that this is how she lures her student into her web. So obviously this is going to be a really disturbing story, but people say that it's like American Psycho, but a teacher. Because throughout the story, you're in her head and hearing how she rationalizes all these deeply despicable things that she's doing. Personally, my favorite books are always about horrible, despicable people. I just find that really interesting to read about. So I think that despite the horrible actions that this character is going to take, I think potentially I could still appreciate this story. So those are all the books that I've read or have up by TBR that are based in academic settings. So hopefully you found a recommendation to get you in that academia aesthetic this fall. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a like. I would really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to have you back. And let me know in the comments below if you're going to pick up any of these books or if you've already read some of them, what did you think about them? And I'll talk to you again next time. Bye!